Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Chaotic Bibliophile, and you are about to see this outfit a whole lot. Today I want to tell you about the Booktube prize books that I had to judge for round 2. And in case you don't know what the Booktube prize is, I'm going to link the channel and the Instagram down below so you can find out. Basically a community-based literary prize. This was my first year judging and I chose to judge the nonfiction division. I talked about my experience judging for the first time in the past video and also my judging criteria. So if you're interested in any of that, the link will be down below and in the eye as always. Now, this will be the last round I judge this year, not because I had a hard time doing it or because it was a lot of pressure, which, you know, at time it was, but it's mostly because the next few months are going to be crazy. But I really enjoyed it. I am thinking maybe not only doing mixed judging for next year in nonfiction and translation, but actually wait and judge maybe the 2 final rounds instead of like the first 2 or like sitting one out and then doing it. I didn't do that this year because, as I said, I am conditioned by forces external to myself. This second round was a bit of a roller coaster because I was more excited for all of the books. Like I thought all of them sounded interesting and right up my alley. And then I ended up liking less books than on round 1. Yeah, it wasn't such a success. And I still think my favorite book that I've read out of all the books is The Third Rainbow Girl, which didn't make it past round 1 and I was very sad about it. Anyways, I do know which books made it. My top 2 books made it, and then one that wasn't on my top 3 spots made it as well. That was a better outcome in relation to my judging than that of round 1. Of course, I'm not judging on personal liking necessarily, so how much of a win for me is it really? Let's just start. Just like I did in the previous video, I am going to start from number 6 and work my way up to the best book. I took notes dutifully. Number 6 is Minor Feelings by Cathy Park Hong. This is a collection of 8, if I'm not mistaken, fragmentary essays. I had never read Cathy Park Hong, but she is apparently a really famous poet and I am curious to read her poetry because I can tell she's a good writer. The problem is that these essays are all over the place. There is a title that sort of serves as a North Star, but it disappears very often. Honestly, as essays, they are not very good. I don't care how experimental an essay is, it always has to have a center. And no matter how much it stretches outwards from that center, it needs to be able to draw itself back. I'm sorry if you disagree, but that is part of my personal theory of the essay, if you'd like. I just believe it's the way it should be in order to be good. Now, what I've seen, because this is a very popular book, and what I've seen is that a lot of people judge it on whether it relates to them or not, because Cathy Park Hong is Korean American, so she talks a lot, of course, about immigration. Of course, it's a very timely book, and I think that because I am not American or Asian, of course, I was not looking for identification in any way, really. I was looking for insight and analysis, so I didn't have that experience where a lot of people give it 5 stars because it really resonates with their experience, or they give it like 2 or 1 because it's like, my experience is nothing like that. So I was very detached from that, and I think when it came to judging, it helped me. I also think they are so popular because they are easy to read in little chunks, and it came out at the perfect time for that because in 2020 everyone was having attention problems and wanting to read either really immersive long novels or just like little chunks. And I think that's why this is so successful, because it imitates the way Twitter works. If you're not reading it all in one go, you don't necessarily notice the disconnect between the pieces. There are a lot of really quotable, really profound moments of insight within those little squares, but as a whole, as essays, each essay doesn't work. I think I found 1 or 2 essays that really worked, but the others just weren't that good. I think she is a good writer and I would love to read her poetry and more of her artwork, because the parts where she talked specifically about art, I thought were the strongest. You can tell she doesn't have, you know, the rigor. So that is why I gave it the 6th spot. Then number 5, I put The Next Migration by Sonia Shah. This was such a disappointment. I was so excited. And this book had me. It had me at the beginning. Oh my god, the intro. I was like, yes, this is going to be on my top 3. It's so good. And then it lost me. Because I think the writing is really good, but it does something that I find unforgivable. I don't know how it got past so many people. And it's basically that mixes concepts or makes leaps in logic that are so big, and she's a biologist, I think, in order to favor her thesis. It really upset me because I think it's really irresponsible. So basically, this is pro-immigration propaganda. I'm going to call it propaganda because the science in here is used in a very propagandistic way. And the supporting statements there are that we think of ourselves as this very static, sedentary species, but actually immigration is normal and we're always on the move. I agree to a large extent. Ideologically, I'm very pro-immigration. If you read, for example, this book by Rutger, Bregman, Utopia for Realists, one of the chapters is on free immigration and why it's basically good not to have frontiers or like to have lax frontiers. If you want to read that book, it's amazing, so I really recommend it. But her arguments, okay, so first, she takes not only human behavior, but like animal behavior and like plant behavior, and she mixes it all. And I understand that us humans are a kind of animal, but you just can't compare bird migratory patterns that are almost instinctual and ingrained into the ecosystem versus like refugees. It's just not, you know what I mean? I know I'm not a scientist, so maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's not necessarily science stuff. It's just logic stuff. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Maybe you disagree with me. And then she completely disregards colonization and epidemics, which, you know, in 2020, ironic. But just like how the introduction of foreign species is very dangerous, and this is not to be used as an argument against immigration because they are so not the same thing. But if you are going to make the case for human migration through biology, then you have to recognize the fact that in a lot of cases the introduction of foreign species results in annihilation of the others. It's just mind-boggling. Of course, she knows much more about biology than me. She starts the book by talking about how she studied butterflies instead of birds because butterflies are easier to track and you don't have to get up as early. And she has a book, I think, on pandemics in general. So I know she knows more than I do. It's just that the way she uses the knowledge that I'm sure is 100% correct to back up arguments in a way that is just completely unrelated. She also generalizes a lot and makes weird, implausible analogies, and I just couldn't let that slide. I am very upset with this book. Maybe this should have been my 6th book. I think I gave this a pass because at least the science was right. I don't know, have you read it? What did you think? Let's move on. Let's just move on. Number 4, I put The Dead Are Arising by Payne with the help of Tamara Payne. So this is basically the result of Payne's 20 or 30 years of research on Malcolm X. And then he sadly passed away and his daughter had to finish the book. And it's supposed to be a biography of Malcolm X. I think this is written very well. It's a bit messy. And I read a review that wanted to be very polite about it, and so it had this line: it might not have the scholarly rigor or the convincing narrative of the other Malcolm X authoritative biographies. But I was like, okay, you're being nice. I get it. I don't support it, but I get it. I think this is a good companion to the autobiography of Malcolm X. But the problem is that it doesn't stand on its own as a book. I am not American. I know who Malcolm X is. And you know, for a Chilean millennial woman, I know the basics, but I have never read a biography of him. And I was actually very excited. But this is not a good biography if you don't know anything or virtually anything about Malcolm X. And you might argue, well, weren't you evaluating not according to your personal bias? Well, there's always bias, but you know, not personal enjoyment, and that is true. But this is presented as a biography, and it should be able to stand on its own. If it were sold and packaged and organized as these are testimonies about Malcolm X and will complement whatever knowledge you have of him, and it's for admirers of Malcolm X or people who, you know, want to go further than the autobiography, then that wouldn't be a problem. But as a biography, this does not stand on its own. I just don't think I learned too much about him. Again, it's very good if you already know a lot about Malcolm X, because what Les Payne did was interview so many primary sources and he organized them. One thing that really did bother me, and I didn't take points away from it for this because I don't think it detracts of it as a book, but if I were reviewing it on my own terms, I would also add that I think it sucks that Malcolm X sexism was brushed over. And not only that, but other of his less than fine qualities. It's 2020 when this was published, right? You can admire someone and admit his flaws, basically. And there is this section when it almost condones it because it was directed towards white women. I just cannot say he was mean to white girls and it was okay because he wasn't mean to black girls, which again, not true. I don't want to make it seem like I hate Malcolm X or anything. I admire a lot of stuff about him and I acknowledge his importance in history and I want to learn more about him, but this book wasn't it. If it were like a scholarly work that is meant to support other knowledge, then that would be fine. But in this case, I don't think it makes the cut. Then number 3, we have Fever, Feuds and Diamonds by Paul Farmer. And this is a medical memoir meets history of Africa meets pop epidemiology book. Of course, very relevant. This book was so dry, quite honestly, but it's in third place over the others because there's nothing really wrong with it, and I say that with an asterisk. But upon my read, other than being bored with it, especially the first part, the memoir part was very dull, unnecessarily detailed. Then the history part I really did like, and then the reflections themselves on epidemics and how, you know, they work and how people can respond and how doctors respond and communities respond, I thought was the strongest part. Of course, I think Paul Farmer is a doctor, so it makes sense. But yeah, it was so dry. And then I saw reviews that said the same thing, but still gave it high ratings. And yeah, it's a book that there's nothing really wrong with it. And it's not badly written, but it's also not extraordinarily written. You know what I mean? But then I read a couple of reviews that said that he oversimplifies the history of Africa. And of course, I am not qualified to pass judgment on that. It read okay to me, especially considering that he's not a historian and that it's not a history book. It felt like enough information to understand what was going on, but I still didn't love it. I thought it was just fine. I want to read more on the history of Africa, liked the reflections. I think it's an okay book. Then entering the 2 books that I think are actually extraordinary and I was so impressed with what they did. Number 2 is The Address Book by Deirdre Mask. The subtitle for this is What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Race, Wealth, and Power. And I read this subtitle specifically because a lot of people seem to review this negatively because they expected it to be something else. They wanted more data or more like fun facts on the addresses themselves. And I would read that book. I would love to read that book, believe you me. But that is not what this is. This is an analysis of identities, class, race, structures, and how they become embedded in addresses. Of course, addresses are related to space, but not necessarily. This book was brilliant, so well written. It's so short because you have to think there are a lot of notes here. This is less than 300 pages, but still manages to make the arguments so well supported by data and presented in a way that is so wonderful and so engaging. And of course, I had high hopes. That is why I got the physical copy. You can see I was hoping it would get here in time, and it totally did. This was actually like the second book I finished. I was more than satisfied. It superseded my expectations. My only criticism would be that I would rethink the titles of the chapters, because the titles make it seem like the chapter is going to be about one place in particular, and often it's about that place and somewhere else, or it's about a point. So I think the chapters are a bit misleading, but I am in awe that she managed to tackle so many different places around the globe and so many different issues in relation to street addresses. It's just so good. You should definitely read it. I think it's a really cool work of like fun facts and microhistory, but it's also a cool work of sociology, and it gives you much food for thought. So I really recommend this book. And then number one, that I actually think I liked perhaps less than the address book, but I think it's nearly a perfect book, and that is Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. This is a look into one American family, I want to say in the 50s, but I might be remembering wrong. It's a family where the father, Donald, if I'm not mistaken, suffered from schizophrenia, and he passed it along several of his male sons. It's also a look at the history of schizophrenia and how it's being treated, and how basically families such as these acted as guinea pigs and the ethics of that. So the chapters on the family are interspersed with chapters on science and the research, and it just strikes the perfect balance between the two. I learned so much, but I was also riveted by the family's story. The way he chose to tell that story is amazing. His writing is brilliant. I will say though that it's very much in line with new journalism, so Joan Didion style, Truman Capote style, Hunter S. Thompson style, in the sense of he doesn't necessarily acknowledge where he got the information. At the end, you understand that he got it through interviews and a lot of research, but it's not like your typical nonfiction book in terms of citations. The medical stuff is all cited, but the biography is pretty much a narrative, and it's not done under those standards. It is a matter of discussion if in this day and age that journalism is still acceptable. I think we could talk about that, but in terms of what the book set out to do, I think it accomplishes that perfectly. And again, I was so riveted. I think he managed to paint such a vivid portrait, and the informative part was also very informative and didn't dumb it down, but in my case it never felt like too much. I have heard some people say it's a bit too dense, but I think it's enough. Again, goes into the research, but also tells a story about the research and all the different complications and hardships and even personal interests and the reasons why schizophrenia hasn't been that well researched. It's just fascinating. If you're interested in schizophrenia but you're hesitant to pick it up because of the family factor like I was, it's just so well accomplished. Clearly Robert Kolker is an amazing writer. The book is amazing. I don't know if I like it more than the address book. I think I like the address book more because of all the things I learned that I wasn't expecting to learn from that book. But objectively speaking, I think this is the most accomplished book. And it's also like a page turner. So I really recommend it as well. That was my judging for the Booktube prize. Now I need to check, but I think the books that passed from my section are the address book, Hidden Valley Road, and The Dead Are Arising. Yes, the address book, The Dead Are Arising, and Hidden Valley Road. Amazing. Also, I'm very happy to see that Inferno, which I really want to read, Red Comet, and Caste made it through, because I am so looking forward to reading those books. Again, I'm not going to be participating in these next few rounds just because of time constraints, but I am excited that they are being recognized. Notes on a Silencing by Lacy Crawford also made it through, which is a book that I put 6 on round 1, but I did really enjoy. So I'm still happy to see it there. Also, Our Bodies, Their Battlefield. So yeah, you can check all 12 semifinalists on their Instagram and also their Booktube channel in case you want to see it. I just wanted to comment on those in particular because very excited to read them. Red Comet is one that I'm going to try and read this year, but I don't know if I'll get to. We'll see. It's just stuff is coming, so I'm trying to, you know, prepare myself mentally for the fact that I might not be reading as many books as I am right now, let's just say. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe and comment, have you read any of these books? Do you want to read any of these books after hearing me talk about them? And or are you rooting for a Booktube prize book in particular? Please do let me know, no matter if I reviewed it or not. I'm very curious. Or if it's fiction, that's also fine. I think I'm rooting, I don't think it will win, but I would love it if The Address Book wins out of the ones that I've read, because I just love that book so much. Of course, if Comet won, I would be very, very happy, because literary biographies are taking over the world and I'm so here for it, but I don't have any illusions of that happening. Anyways, I will be following the prize closely and I hope you do too. See you next time.